Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Ask a Property Manager. Today is February 10th, 2021. This is episode number 58. We're coming to you from Studio 2.0 here at Own Buffalo. I'm Andrew Schultz, principal broker of Own Buffalo Inc. And on today's show, we're going to be talking about redeveloping hotels into apartments. We're also going to be talking about tenants with firearms and how to access the equity in your home. We're also going to take a look at some questions from housing providers around the country and so much more. Before we jump into that, we're going to plug our social media. New episodes of Ask a Property Manager drop every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern. You can find those on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Buffalo Foreclosed Homes. You can also find those the same day we add the replay over on our YouTube page, youtube.com/OwnBuffalo. And don't forget about our Instagram over at instagram.com/OwnBuffalo. Last but not least, don't forget about the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast. A new episode of the podcast drops tomorrow on Thursday. This week, we're taking a look at California's bill to pay landlords 80% of their back rent, but at what cost? We're also going to be taking a look at HOAs and how to break up with bad tenants. You can find the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast over at rentprep.com/podcast or anywhere podcasts are heard. New episodes of that drop every other Thursday. So let's jump right into our news of the week. We're going to start with this article from CNBC. This was published on Thursday, February 4th, so just after last week's episode. And this article deals with the redevelopment of hotels into affordable housing, which is kind of an interesting tactic. Let's jump right in here. Want to own an apartment building? Buy a distressed hotel for pennies on the dollar. Communities are desperate for more affordable housing, but the cost for developers is just too high. Land, labor, and materials were pricey before the coronavirus pandemic, and they are even more so now. That is why some creative developers are now turning to hotels, and it appears to be a match made in real estate heaven. The stay-at-home culture of the pandemic has hit the hotel sector hard. The share of hotels behind on their mortgages rose to just over 18% in December, up from less than 2% a year ago. Wow, that's a huge jump. According to Fitch Ratings, hotels are suffering even more than retail real estate. But that creates an opportunity for investors like David Peters in Minneapolis, who's buying distressed hotels at bargain basement prices and converting them to affordable apartments. Apartments around here, you might pay $120,000 a door, and we can purchase hotels probably at $30,000 to $40,000 a door, and then maybe put $10,000 a door into renovations, Peters said. Suite hotels are cheaper to convert as they already have kitchens. Standard rooms don't require all that much work either. The demand for these affordable units is only getting stronger. What we saw when the pandemic struck was even more demand for the micro apartment style of affordable housing, Peters said. Peters bought a hotel on the outskirts of Minneapolis just before the pandemic struck. He converted it into small apartment units. He left some rooms as hotel units, so he didn't have to deal with changing the zoning. When we purchased this hotel, we were sitting at very low occupancy, and with a matter of a couple of months as we were renovating units, and even some of the units before we renovated them, we were able to get people into them, Peters said. The shortage of affordable housing is now critical. The so-called Class C housing stock is now 96% occupied nationally, and 99% occupied in the Midwest, according to RealPage, a property management software company. Pricier, so-called Class A apartments are more plentiful. Land and construction costs preclude virtually any construction of new market rate product at the Class C price point. New development just isn't financially feasible, said Greg Willett, chief economist at RealPage. All the Class C product that exists consists of older properties where rents are simply under the rates for newer communities. Class C housing stock is decreasing even more as investors buy older buildings and upgrade them in order to achieve higher rents. The difference in monthly rent between a Class A and a Class C property averages around $600, according to Willett. That price difference is critical to renters like Michelle Wickstrom, who recently moved into Peters' Minneapolis apartment property. Wickstrom said she was relieved to find it. It's hard to find anything that's affordable or within my price range, she said. There's not a lot of low-income housing or anything in this area. Zoning is different for hotels and multifamily apartments, so sometimes the deals can be tricky. Peters, however, says that if developers work closely with the local municipalities, they can get the deals done. I think it really is community by community and opportunity by opportunity, but I know that they've been very excited because the last thing they want is to have a building with 120 units and it's sitting empty, he said. Peters has 2 other deals in the works, another in Minnesota and one in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. The property in South Dakota has an appraised value of around $6 million in 2017. Peters is expecting to acquire it for $3.2 million because the owners defaulted on their loan. It is not difficult to find capital for the projects, he said, as investors in today's low interest rate environment are looking to real estate for higher returns. We can offer the potential residents a better value, and we can offer the investors a good solid return. So I've actually seen a fairly high amount of interest in it, Peters said. So that kind of harkens right with what we've been talking about this entire time. We're starting to see more and more redevelopment of hotel properties. Even here in the Buffalo market, I know we talked a few weeks ago about the AM&A's building downtown, which has gone through several different redevelopment projects at this point. But the current project looks to be a combination of commercial retail space, and I don't know if they've eliminated the hotel entirely, but it's going to be predominantly residential market rate apartments at this point. So we are starting to see a lot more of this redevelopment, this style of redevelopment, and it is becoming popular. Obviously, there's no financing out there for hotel projects right now, but if you can take a hotel that is, you know, like even in the article they talked about, I'm going to scroll back down here so that I can pull the numbers. They talked about, wrong article. They picking up a hotel property for $3.2 million that was assessed at $6 million in 2017. So it just goes to show you that these properties, these hotel properties, obviously the assessed value is tied heavily to the amount of revenue they're generating, and in the middle of a global pandemic, there aren't a lot of people taking up hotel rooms. So it's interesting to see more of this style of redevelopment happening. I expect that we'll continue to see this as things continue. It'll probably be several years before you start to see development in the hotel and hospitality industry again. At least that's my prediction. I could be completely wrong, but I would like to think that based on what I'm seeing, based on the articles that we're reading and things like that, that's probably the direction that we're moving in. So just something to keep in mind. Hotels for an investment, that's a long-term play. But if you're doing something where there's a conversion element, then you might see a little bit faster return. We're going to jump into our next article here. This one is from Housing Wire. The Biden stimulus could worsen the affordable housing crisis. I'm not trying to get into an argument on politics by bringing this article in, but I do think that it makes sense to understand how the government is responding to the ongoing crisis and how that is going to have an impact on the housing industry, which is why I pulled this article in particular. Let's jump right in. The nation's most influential housing trade groups sent a letter to the Housing Committee on Financial Services saying that any new stimulus package considered would need to have rental assistance and warned of dire consequences if it did not. Housing groups including the CCIM Institute, Council for Affordable and Rural Housing, Institute of Real Estate Management, Manufactured Housing Institute, Mortgage Bankers Association, the National Affordable Housing Management Association, National Apartment Association, National Association of Home Builders, National Association of Housing Cooperatives, National Association of Realtors, National Leased Housing Association, and the National Multifamily Housing Council sent a letter to Representative Maxine Waters, Democrat out of California, chair of the committee, and Representative Patrick McHenry, Republican, North Carolina, the ranking member, outlining their concerns. The reason that I read every single one of those organizations out is that there's one key organization that I think should be in there that's missing, and that's NARPM, National Association for Residential Property Managers. To not see one of the major trade groups in the apartment space, or I'm sorry, more in the single family space with NARPM, being involved in being involved in lobbying efforts in this capacity, kind of disappointed to not see their name on here, considering we do have a membership to NARPM. But continuing forward, in the letter, the trade groups urged Congress to move beyond the one-size-fits-all federal housing policies in favor of a more tailored approach. President Joe Biden's American Rescue Plan stimulus proposes a continuation of previously passed policies for the rental sector, such as an extension of federal eviction moratoriums. However, the letter states this approach could threaten the stability of the rental sector. It proposes instead a rental assistance plan to be considered. We strongly support the inclusion of additional rental assistance in the American Rescue Plan, the letter states. Without additional robust direct rental assistance beyond the newly proposed $25 billion, housing providers may never fully recover outstanding debt, whether through the eviction process or otherwise, and the housing affordability crisis will be exacerbated in the long and short term. This could devastate the industry and hurt America's most vulnerable renters. The apartment industry faces an estimated nearly $60 billion in lost rent for 2020, according to a recent study released by the Urban Institute and authored by Moody's Analytics chief economist Mark Zandi and the Falling Creek Advisors owner Jim Parrott. The letter explains that this places a heavy financial strain on many in the rental industry, including mom and pop firms. Kind of upset with myself that I didn't highlight that because that's really what we talk about a lot on this show. So I'm going to throw the highlight on there now. Functioning under reduced revenue for almost a year has drained reserves, caused deferred maintenance and capital improvements, and placed many housing providers on the precipice of economic ruin, the analysis states. That certainly warranted highlighting. We've talked about that multiple times on this show and on the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast. As part of Biden's $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, the administration proposes an additional $30 billion for renters assistance and $5 billion to help relieve the strain of homelessness. In their analysis, Zandi and Parrott said this is what is needed for the industry. This is exactly what is needed to give us, this vulnerable population, a bridge to the other side of the economic crisis when most will be able to return to jobs needed to pay the rent again, they wrote. While the entire $1.9 trillion relief plan is unlikely to get through the legislative process, we expect that lawmakers will agree to much of the funds proposed for rental assistance. Other economists say that the rental space is being heavily hit, creating concerns for the housing market. There are some things that are of concern from a policy perspective, and that in the housing sector is actually in the rental space, Fannie Mae chief economist Doug Duncan recently told Housing Wire. There is a risk of significant increase in the level of evictions in that space. The difficulty is targeted these policies so that they don't distort normal behavior patterns. The devil will be in the details on how that gets put into place. Unemployment is definitely higher among the renter population than among the owner population. Congress continues to negotiate the stimulus package as Republicans seek to slim down the $1.9 trillion package to about $600 billion. The White House, however, remains unmoving on that front. The House passed the bill as a budget resolution, meaning it did not need any votes from the Republican Party. The Senate could do the same, however, it would require every one of the Democratic senators on board with the new package. Renters need additional assistance, including emergency housing vouchers, to ensure that people in rural, suburban, and urban communities can remain stably housed. Waters said in a committee hearing titled "More Than a Shot in the Arm," the need for additional COVID-19 stimulus. More funding is needed for persons experiencing homelessness who face an even greater health risk as a result of the pandemic. We must also address the reality that homeowners across America face a foreclosure crisis if Congress does not step in to support modifications before the pandemic ends. This committee will also need to come to the aid of businesses and their workers who are barely staying afloat, including small businesses, minority-owned businesses, and the sectors hit hard like the airlines. So this is another interesting article, and I'm probably going to get a little bit more ranty than what I typically would when I cover one of these articles, because I want to talk about the stimulus funds that are being guaranteed towards rental assistance. In the most recent past stimulus bill, the $900 billion past stimulus bill, there was a specific carve-out that landlords could apply for assistance on behalf of their tenants. And we spent some time here at Own Buffalo in the last couple of weeks. There's actually a good resource for Western New York landlords, actually pretty much anybody in Western New York, and I'm going to pull that up right now. There's actually a good resource here for landlords who, switch to desktop, are trying to find help for their property or for their tenants who need assistance. So let's just search for assistance resources in 14206. That's the zip code of our office. And you can see here that it gives you the list of everybody and then what services they're able to offer. So for instance, we're going to scroll down here to somebody that I know offers rental assistance. Give me 1 second here, just trying to locate. See if I can do it this way. Search for keyword rent. There we go, rent payment assistance. So this is a list of every agency in the Western New York region that is offering some form of rental assistance to the community, whether it be directly to tenants or whatever the case may be. It's a pretty substantial list, as you can see here. We actually spent some time calling every single one of these agencies, located in Erie and Niagara County, to see if there was any assistance that we could help to unlock for our tenants. And every single agency told me that the tenant had to go and apply directly. They were basically ignoring the edict from the federal government that landlords could apply on behalf of the tenant. And I don't know if it was just because of the funds that they currently had been issued, there, whatever the case may be. But when you have a carve out that says that landlords can apply for assistance on behalf of the tenant, and then you don't have any sort of mechanism by way the landlords can actually make that application, it's a very frustrating process for everyone involved, especially when you're really just trying to do right by your tenants and help them get through what's otherwise going to be a very nasty situation for everybody involved. Like, it's unfortunate. New York State also had a program that they were running. I'm not sure if I can find the website address for that quite as quickly, but that expired on February 1st, 2021, and there's been nothing really come down the pipeline about a renewal on that or access to federal funds through that program, whatever the case may be. Essentially, they're talking about a lot of funds out there being accessible to housing providers and to tenants, but as near as we can tell, they're not actually doing anything. They're not actually putting these funds out into the community. I have yet to hear from any of our tenants who have been successful in obtaining that assistance or anything along those lines. So it's kind of an unfortunate situation. Hopefully, if we're going to continue to pour money into this problem, we're actually doing it in such a capacity that the funds could be obtained by the landlords and by the tenants that desperately need these funds in order to continue moving forward. So that is my one hope when it comes to this. Hopefully, we do get to the point where at least these funds are accessible to the people who most need access to these funds. But that pretty much wraps up our news for the day. Let's jump to something a little bit more humorous. This is actually one from our own archives, and I forgot that I had this until I came across it the other day looking for something else. You have several different types of plumbing here. This is probably one of the most hodgepodge plumbing repairs I've ever seen. So starting on the left side of the image, you have a piece of PVC coming into a piece of rubber tubing, essentially, with a couple of band straps on it. That moves into what looks to be a giant chunk of brass, which then moves into some galvanized or cast. I think that's cast, and then finally back down into some PVC. This was, I believe, in a property that we were doing a home inspection on. And I don't think that we ended up moving forward with the purchase on this property. Because if we find something like this, who knows what's hidden in the walls that we're not seeing. So that's a pretty crazy one. That one came directly from our personal archives. People running around wearing masks and their furnace filter looks like this. Just a quick reminder that it's time to change your furnace filter if you haven't done that in a while, and probably wash or dispose of whatever mask that you're currently using. Just a quick reminder, though those masks don't last forever, they are meant to be either washed or disposed of on a regular basis. So keep that in mind. All right, let's jump to our questions from housing providers around the country. We're going to start with this one. Shots fired. Someone was trying to break into my tenant's home. The tenant came out and fired a gun. Neighbors are freaking out and contacted the property owner about his crazy tenants. This is a first for me, but seems as though the tenant was in their rights. This is a nice neighborhood and no one was actually shot. What are your thoughts? My thoughts are that this is best for the police to handle and you should just stay out of the situation entirely. Firearm laws vary from state to state, sometimes from city to city. It's definitely not worth jumping in the middle and getting involved in something like this. Frankly, I would tell the neighbor to either contact the police department directly or, if there's an issue, or better yet, mind their own business. It's not, it's not really, it doesn't sound to me like this is a situation where the neighbor really even needs to be involved. It sounds to me like this is something that the tenant more than likely contacted the police because of the attempted break-in. So chances are there's already a police report on it, and chances are there's nothing you're going to do in this situation. I certainly wouldn't jump in the middle of it. I would tell the neighbor to mind their own damn business and move on with life. Unlocking equity. This is a good one. I have 2 rental properties with mortgages, but my personal home is paid off. If I combine my rental mortgages by taking out a mortgage on my personal residence, can I still deduct the interest from the rental income on each rental? If so, how would I separate that out? I would not do this. I think this is an incredibly poor idea. Let the mortgages remain on your rental properties. If they're at an interest rate that's too high for you, go ahead and do a refi, but leave the mortgages on the rental properties. Don't encumber your personal residence for business purposes, for business mortgages. There are plenty of ways to pull equity out of your primary if you want to use it for your rental business. Talk to a financial advisor before you jump into a situation like that, and talk to a financial advisor about this entire situation before you make any decisions. But something that you might want to talk to your financial advisor about is possibly pulling a home equity line of credit such that you could make a cash purchase on a property if you came across something that was a great deal, have access to funds to be able to do the rehab yourself, and then basically refinance the property and rent it out. You know, classic Burr method: buy, rehab, rent, refinance, and repeat. The most important part of this, if you're going to be using a home equity line of credit off of your personal residence, is obviously the refi and making sure that you pay back that line of credit and keeping that as clear as you can whenever you can. Because you don't want to sit and have a ton of business debt stacked up on your personal residence. It's just bad for business if we're being honest. So keep your debt on the business assets, not on your personal assets, as much as humanly possible. If you're really in a situation where you want to access that equity, talk to a financial advisor about possibly a home equity line of credit or something along those lines, something that you're not constantly making a payment on it when you don't necessarily need the funds or whatever the case may be. But you need to tread very, very carefully on any sort of a situation like this, and certainly talk to your accountant or your financial advisor before you go ahead and make that decision. Screening an applicant. Good morning, folks. I'm in the process of screening some applications and came across an applicant with a high 500 credit score and a 75% rating of on-time bill payments through Zillow, through the Zillow credit app. That seems okay to me, but his fiance has a 23% rating and a high 400 credit score. They provided check stubs, but also my gut is telling me to keep it moving. My reasoning is if things go south between the couple and the guy ends up leaving, she's not looking trustworthy enough to pay. Also, she's a no when it comes to my criteria. What do you think? Would you rent to this couple if one has okay credit and the other had bad credit and payment history? Thank you in advance. You answered the question yourself. You said that they don't meet your rental criteria. And that's a very straightforward process. If you have your established criteria and your criteria meet the fair housing standards, send your adverse action letter and walk away. Just keep moving. If they don't meet your criteria, this is a very straight, binary yes or no answer. There's not really a maybe here. They either meet your criteria or they don't meet your criteria. And I know that there are some times when somebody's close to meeting your criteria and you want to take that chance. You have established criteria for a reason. Follow your established criteria. You'll be better off in the long run. So you've already said yourself, this person does not meet your criteria. Send that adverse action letter and move on to the next applicant. I wouldn't spend much time screwing around, and I wouldn't, keep them waiting around for an answer when you know that you're not going to move forward with them. I would just move forward with your next applicant. Asking about evictions in New York State. In New York State, is it okay to ask on a rental application if a person has ever broken a lease? I understand evictions are sealed and you cannot look that information up. Yes, you are correct. Evictions are sealed data in the state of New York now. That was passed as part of the HSTPA, the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act, in June of 2019. So yes, you are correct. You cannot ask about evictions on your rental application. What we ask is if they've ever broken a lease. We also ask if they've ever willfully or intentionally refused to pay rent when due. And I wanted to make sure that I read that out correctly. So we actually went ahead and removed the questions about asking anything about evictions. We also stopped pulling that data from RentPrep, our data provider for credit and background checks. We actually specifically spoke to them and told them we needed the eviction data removed from our reports going forward so that we could be compliant with the HSTPA. So can you ask about evictions in the state of New York on your rental application? I don't believe so. You might want to consult with an attorney to double check on that. We stopped asking the question just as a fail-safe. We do ask some other questions, but we don't actually ask anything about eviction, and we no longer screen for that when we do our tenant screening. If you're in a state that allows you to continue to searching for that eviction data, my recommendation is that you do. The most recent stat that was shared with me by Steve over at RentPrep was that I believe 75% of people who have one eviction on their record, or I'm sorry, once you have one eviction on your record, you were 75% more likely to get a second eviction on your record. I believe that's how the statistic was worded. So very interesting. When it comes to screening and the data that we have access to or the data that we don't have access to, I think that that's going to become a very, very big concern, especially in a post-COVID world, as to what data are we allowed to use, what data are we not allowed to use, and how does that data need to be considered when we're talking about a COVID eviction versus a non-COVID eviction, or whatever the case may be. It'll be interesting to see how that pans out here over the course of the next year or so, hopefully as eviction moratoria lift and things of that nature. So you're on the right path by not asking about evictions in New York. There are some questions that you can still ask and still be in compliance. My recommendation would be just be careful, make sure you have a good set of criteria, and make sure that you understand what you can and cannot ask. If you are in New York, I will reference that piece of legislation again. That was the HSTPA, the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act of June 2019. You can find that right on the New York State website. Just search NYS HSTPA. That pretty much wraps things up for this week's episode of the Ask a Property Manager show. Thank you so much for watching. We love producing Ask a Property Manager, and you can certainly help us to improve by dropping a question in the comments either on Facebook or on YouTube, and your question may be answered in an upcoming episode. If you enjoyed this content, or if we brought some value to your day, please do us a favor and hit that thumbs up button. YouTube and Facebook both push videos based on community feedback, so every like, comment, subscribe, and share helps us to grow and reach more people. We'll be back next week, February 17th, that's next Wednesday, at 10 a.m. Eastern with another show you won't want to miss. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.